Welcome to Paradigm Shifts, new thinking about our changing times with your host, Harriette M. Steinberg, practicing matrimonial and family law, real estate, trust and estates, and elder law. You can watch episodes on YouTube and listen through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more. For prior episodes, go to www.lawyersonli.com. Now here's the host of Paradigm Shifts, Harriette Steinberg.
Good morning. Welcome,
Good morning, Harriette.
welcome to another episode of Paradigm Shifts. I'm Harriette Steinberg. I'm also known as the Divorce Sherpa. I'm an attorney practicing in the areas of divorce, matrimonial law, elder law, trust and estates, and estate planning. My process of choice when working with clients is mediation and collaborative practice. In each episode of Paradigm Shifts, you will hear from a professional who has an important message to share about change in lifestyle issues. We'll discuss topics including divorce, death, retirement, and more. And with that, I'd like to introduce today's guest, Lee Rosenberg. Lee is one of our leading matrimonial attorneys. He is presently second vice president of the American Academy of Matrimonial Attorneys. He's past chair of the Nassau County Bar Association. He's editor-in-chief of the New York State Family Law Review, and he's a dad. Good morning, Lee.
Good morning, Harriette. I'm sorry I stepped on your intro with a little hello back to you. So
That's
good morning.
fine.
All is well.
Yes. So tell me, what's going on? What's the paradigm shifts that you're seeing in the world, in your world of matrimonial work?
Well, I'm seeing more people being more difficult. I'm seeing more litigation. I'm seeing more issues relating to children. I'm seeing people fighting more over things that they shouldn't fight about. And it is causing even a greater clogging of our system than even we were seeing before, especially since we've been down some judges, since we've had slowdowns as a result of COVID and trying to come back from that. And even though the courts are open, it seems to me that people are more angry, more frustrated, and not playing nice in the sandbox.
What are they fighting about? What would you say is the quote fight of the day?
Well, I'm seeing them mostly having to do with children's issues. People were bottled up for 2 years plus, especially during the early stages of quarantine, where, as you know, you couldn't really start a new divorce action. The courts were not accepting new actions, and they were not accepting applications for relief, except in what the courts would term exigent circumstances, which was a fairly limited set of circumstances that the courts would let you go in, and then try and get in as the courts were getting ready to set up all of the electronics and all of the technology that we now see every day. It was brand new here in New York for a long period of time. Now we're here some 2 years plus after all of that started in March of 2020, but during that period of time when people were cloistered and kind of kept in the household equivalent of a boiling pot with the cover on, it had to go somewhere. We're seeing some upticks in domestic violence. We're seeing some upticks in orders of protection being sought. And so kind of all of that has now come through as the floodgates have opened to getting into the system. So I think part of that has helped kind of churn the anger over periods of time. You also had circumstances where you've got two people now who used to be out in the workforce in most two-person working family households, and a lot of them are still working from home. So there's not even an escape At
Right.
home, where you've got people going out and going to offices. I mean, my office, I've been in my office since the beginning, frankly. I think I worked from home for about a week, maybe, even though my office, we were completely set up ahead of time, got ready to go, had my tech guy come in right before all this started. So we were ready and we were able to work remotely and still can. It's not for me. So I'm here every day and I love my wife and my son, but I could not work from home. And so I think that kind of confluence of things where people are still together in bad circumstances kind of puts us where we are today.
So, in terms of a major, when COVID hit, I know many of us had clients that were not in agreement about taking vaccinations for themselves, and then, of course, for the children. In my world, which is, the mediation and collaborative practice, thankfully, we were we dealt with those clients. But how were your clients treating those issues?
Well, I'm a believer not to run down to the courthouse unless you have to, especially at the outset. Unless there's a reason to start the litigation in a hurry, there's really no reason for it. Um, uh, I always recommend starting out with a letter to the other spouse. Um, and I will tell my clients, here's the letter that's going to go to your spouse, a letter of representation that we've been retained to help address your marital difficulties. And I will say, I'm going to email it to you.
Mm-hmm.
Show it to your spouse. Have the discussion with your spouse before my letter goes out, because I don't want them to be blindsided. If
Right.
you're discussing the possibility of divorce or separation or resolution of any of those issues, let your spouse know that you've hired counsel and that your counsel would like to try and work things out amicably if at all possible. Um, I also recommend counseling in some situations if they're not quite ready, and I'll recommend mediation when the circumstances require it. Not every case is appropriate for mediation, as you well know, and those domestic violence is the main circumstance where you don't have that because of the power imbalance.
Mm-hmm.
But running into court is usually not the best way to go unless you have to, and there's an exigent circumstances that requires it. I think that you talk about paradigm shifts, which is the world we live in, is a shift from facts to not so facts, science to not so science. Uh, I could not imagine in my lifetime that I would be seeing on a regular basis people who are not sure that the world is round.
It's so
That's
true.
the world that we live in now. And when you have people who are in that kind of a bubble, for whatever reason, whether it's their economic circumstances, whether it's their upbringing, whether it's educational background, whether it's just their general politics, um, you do see households where people are divided on these issues, and when that happens, that is really a source for conflict. A lot of judges will want to say that elephants don't marry giraffes.
Hmm.
We hear this all the time, and you
Yes.
get all of those sayings that a lot of judges will tell you, essentially to say that they're both fairly similar in their discontent and in their inappropriateness.
Right.
I don't really believe that. Well,
Mm-hmm.
it may take two to tango, to use another phrase,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
sometimes, but not always. Elephants don't always marry giraffes. That's why we have the saying opposites attract.
Right.
And it's fodder for conflict. And on the vaccination issue and on the science issue and on the COVID issue, this is where we've seen a number of situations, and I'm litigating, I have litigated them, and I'm litigating them now, where because of the person's particular bent on this issue, somebody has to be able to make a decision, and the one who is suffering is going to be the child or children. It's not always politics. It could be one's theory of holistic medicine versus Western medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and you and I, without talking names, you and I have had that where you were the mediator on one of those cases.
Yes,
And
yes.
unfortunately, that case to some extent has continued because of other circumstances, which I won't get into. But um, one person did not believe in science. It wasn't that she was a conspiracy theorist per se, but she didn't believe in Western medicine. And that created a conflict where mom was like, no, I want to slather oils on the children instead of taking them to a doctor. And dad was like, no, you've got to take the kid to a doctor so that the child does not get worse. And the fact that it was complicated by the children having special needs, which is another area that you are certainly well versed in, creates even a more difficult circumstances.
And in addition to those two major factors in that particular case, I can also say that it was the stress, the animosities that were developing just from the divorce that sort of acted as the fuel, the continual fuel to this particular couple. And you're right, there came a time where, as rational as they each seemed to be separately, when we put their the rocks from his head to the holes in her head, as they say, the children did lose, without court intervention at times, I would say. I mean,
Well,
that's a perfect case.
yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate. And, and with your help, obviously, we did resolve it, but the underlying problems continued in great part because of the respective parenting philosophies. In an intact marriage, it is rare when people don't disagree on something.
True, true.
But in an intact family, you work through those issues and try and put the interests of the right thing to do
Right.
ahead of everything else. When you're going your separate ways, or when these issues are so great that it causes them to go to separate ways, it is very hard for one person to convince the other when both think they are so right. And we see this in our politics. We see this continuing in our politics. What we do is kind of a microcosm of really where we are. Everybody thinks they're right and they cannot see or hear the other person. That's the beauty of mediation, which is that sometimes where you've got two people talking past each other because all they hear is the sound of the other's voice that is now nails on a chalkboard, when suggestions are made by a different voice, like yourself, sometimes they can get past the sound, they're hearing it through a different filter. And
Yeah,
all of a sudden they can say, oh,
yeah.
now I understand.
I'm hearing. And
Yes.
and sometimes it's in addition to it is the interpretation. Many times I have found with clients, when they're hearing the message from a spouse, a divorcing spouse, they're interpreting it as something that is anti their interest. Whereas in mediation or collaborative divorce, we can train people to look underneath, to look at their interests, which I know, Lee, you do in your practice. When you're able to have clients that will work that way, you can show them that they may not be getting exactly what they want, but the end result serves the bigger good or their interest, you know.
Yeah, well, I think that's part of managing the expectations of the person who's walking into your office, or you're seeing them on Zoom or whatever the platform that any particular lawyer uses. My consultations tend not to be an hour in and an hour out. Sometimes I could spend an hour and a half, 2 hours with someone because I want to get to know them and I want them to get to know me. And part of what I do when I meet with somebody initially is I kind of try and get under the hood about the history, the psychology. I want to know about their family backgrounds. I want to know what their relationships are like with their parents, with their siblings, because if I am hearing that, let's say the person who's coming to see me, it doesn't speak to the rest of their family, or that there are assertions that the other spouse has some kind of a mental health problem or an alcohol problem or whatever it is, I start inquiring as to, well, what's going on in their family? And by the way, is there anything similar in your family? Because that affects the dynamic. It affects what negotiations may or may not be like. A lot of these conditions are genetic. And so, where the person who's coming to see me may be complaining about their spouse and about mental health issues, it gives me the opportunity, if I'm asking about medication or history, to say, what about on your side? It's an easy transition. So then I can get a sense of, okay, am I also dealing with somebody who have an issue, or is this person projecting something that they're also experiencing? And that informs me of how I need to deal with this other person who's coming to me, and allows me to have a greater insight, and will tell them, okay, well, if you're accusing your spouse of this, for example, and you've got some of this on your side, understand that that is going to be thrown back on you. So you better be careful where you throw your stones,
Mm-hmm.
because you'll be dealing with that same issue. So perhaps that's not a great way to go.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
We also have social media that we're dealing with, which also creates other issues here, talking about, additionally shifts in how we do things that are a little different that used to be.
What do
People
you
can't
mean?
help themselves. Well, people can't help themselves. Almost without fail, you tell a client when they come in, you always have to say, are you on social media? What platforms are you on? Stay off social media. And they can't help themselves. And to the extent that they can, to some degree, some of them try and wipe themselves off of it, or they try and stop. But they will most likely block their spouse.
Right.
They're
But
not
not
blocking
their
everybody
friends.
else.
Right.
So I can get on
Right.
and I can go through and find a way of what they're posting or what their families are posting. And as an example, there are posts about anti-vax, about COVID as a hoax. In this particular case that you and I had,
Right.
she still had this stuff on social media
Right.
when we're trying to make sure that the kids are vaccinated and all the rest when it became available. And I've got other cases in which the family social media posts really bolster the claims that we are making, where the other party is saying, "Oh, no, that's not true, that's not true." But we can see on their social media that that is what they believe.
Right.
It's
And
fodder for all kinds of information for us.
and ultimately, I would expect that if you're in trial and those are the issues or some of the issues, that is your evidence.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's something we didn't have before. We've had it for years, and I've been using people's social media postings, going back, I don't know how many years at this point. I mean, at least 10, using what somebody did on Facebook. We had one case on trial a bunch of years ago where uh, the father was my client, the wife who had custody of the child, and the husband was claiming that he wasn't making money and he couldn't afford it. And in his social media posting, where he was in a relationship with another woman while the divorce was going on, which is a separate issue,
Okay.
but they had postings on their respective commentary about how they were looking to adopt the child. And so on trial, when he was claiming he couldn't afford to take care of and pay support for the child that he had with his wife, I had his social media post, and it says, "This is your posting. You're looking to adopt a child, but you can't take care of the child you have."
Boy, that is a classic paradigm shift, if I ever heard one in your world. I can, that must have, did the case end up settling
Oh
after that?
no,
No,
went all
no,
the way
no.
down the line. Went all the way down there. I got a trial decision, and worked out very well. My client did because she was the moneyed spouse at that point. She ended up paying spousal support to him for a period of time,
Right.
but he had to pay the child support, and then income was imputed to him. Yeah, ultimately, the decision was the right decision, frankly. But people can't help themselves. They have to, and you see it all the time. Again, in our general media, the relative anonymity of posting online to the world, and I say relative anonymity because obviously their names are out there and their statements are out there, but it's not the same as a direct interaction. And people will say things online that they wouldn't say to your face in many cases. They
Right.
can't help themselves.
Right. That is fascinating. So, what I'm hearing, Lee, you're describing truly a client-centered approach to your work, to your and predominantly you're a litigator. Am I correct?
Yeah, I guess you would have to say that because I'm constantly on trial, even though I don't love it. I mean, when I'm in it, it's is what it is, and hopefully, people think I'm good at it. I wish more would settle easier.
Mm.
I really.
What about working? How are you finding colleagues? There's some talk in the media about incivility. Um, are you? Do you have any view of that particular aspect of things? Is it really overblown? Is it worse? Is it better?
I don't think it's overblown. In fact, the American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers has a national pilot project involving communications efforts to make civility between counsel better. And we're looking at how the general discourse has devolved
Yeah.
over the course of the years. And I think that's a function of really what you see generally in society. I think it's a more confrontational way of life. I think that especially politically over the last decade, plus through COVID,
Yes.
bottled up anger and frustration has been greater. And listen, lawyers as human beings, or as sometimes people don't recognize us as human beings, we're susceptible to the same trials and tribulations as people who don't do what we do for a living. I did as chair of the Nassau Bar Grievance Committee. I had the chair of what we call the LAP committee come in and talk to the committee about uh, um, not only what they do in terms of helping lawyers who have substance and other problems, but generally speaking about how we can better deal with issues of mindfulness and wellness, because we're under the same pressures to a great extent as other people in our own personal lives and in our professional lives. And so, yes, there is a diminution of civility between counsel. It's frankly why it's better if you know the other attorney. Clients always say, "Oh, you're too friendly with the lawyer. You can't, say hello, and you can't shake hands, and you can't." They don't like it. They think you're not being tough enough. That's actually a misnomer because if you know the other person, you can go do battle,
Yes.
but you can cut through a lot of the nonsense and the positioning and actually have a conversation with the other lawyer to try and better resolve the case. Doesn't mean you're selling the client down the river. It means you have an open line of communication to somebody who you can trust,
Exactly.
have a dialogue.
I think that is such an important point, Lee. And frankly, one of the key issues in working with your colleagues. Once your colleagues get to know who you are and how you see things, we can avoid some of the positioning. But you're right. Sometimes clients want a war. They really, they'll want a. I've had clients call and say, are you tough enough?
Right.
Are you tough enough?
Whose side are you on?
Right, exactly. And it's really the wrong standard.
Yeah, that's when I yell at them.
Oh,
I probably shouldn't do that, but
okay. So before we end today, Lee, what's the best way for clients and colleagues to reach out to you? You are such a busy man. I don't know how you do it all, but
that's what people tell me, and that's why my wife likes me home.
yeah, well, that's true. If you keep yourself busy enough, she'll miss you enough. Lee, I want to tell you, I'm married for 59 years to the same man,
Yep.
and now I'm able to work at home.
Yeah, I'm going on 18.
Oh, you're a baby.
But I got married much later in life.
Uh-huh.
People say to me, especially when you're dealing with, when they come to me on prenups and they want to know, what do you think, especially if it's
Right.
a first time marriage for them and there's a lot of money and there's usually the families are involved and they want the prenup and they're like, what do you think, marriage? And I say to them, I love being married and I love being married to my wife.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
I love being home with my family. It's my favorite thing to do is to be around my family.
Yeah.
And hopefully that informs what it is that I do and I can convey to the clients. But the best way to contact me is you can go to the website, Saltzman Chetkof Rosenberg LLP. My email is up there, lrosenberg@scrllp.com. And frankly, if you Google Lee Rosenberg divorce, it's going to come to me. So
Okay.
you'll find me. I'm easy enough. Apparently, I'm easy enough to find. Sometimes it's crazy.
Yeah. I really appreciated our talk today and look forward to working with you and watching the progress of all your leadership in the future. Thanks.
Well, it's a pleasure as always, and this is a very important time, especially just to close out on the paradigm shifts. We're now dealing with attacks on people's rights of privacy and self-determination, and that is a major paradigm shift, and it's something that we must be concerned about, the rights of people to marry who they want to marry. You've got the Supreme Court with same-sex marriage in its sights and reproductive rights in its sights, and these are issues which are, again, polarizing on one hand, but these are rights that, at least with regard to reproductive rights, are at least 50-year-old fundamental rights that have now been stripped, and it certainly affects women far more than it affects men. And this is another paradigm shift. When we're dealing also with assisted reproductive technology, there are frozen embryos that are out there.
Yes.
With contracts that say, in the event of a divorce, either this one or the other one will get the frozen embryos, or they will be destroyed. And now the question may very well be, if the frozen embryos are destroyed and they've been fertilized,
Is that an
what
abort?
is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we have a lot of issues that we're dealing with. And my next editorial and family law review for the State Bar is actually on this issue. So
Well,
we're busy.
thank you. Okay. Thanks.
Always a pleasure, Harriet. Always a pleasure.
Okay.
Anytime. Happy to help.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to Paradigm Shifts, new thinking about our changing times with your host, Harriette M. Steinberg, practicing matrimonial and family law, real estate, trust and estates, and elder law. You can watch episodes on YouTube and listen to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more. For prior episodes, go to www.lawyersonli.com.